Alright, I'm going to show you how to put a motor and gearbox together the correct way. On the motor itself, there's a key in the shaft that you need to remove. So we're going to start by taking the key out of the motor shaft. Now inside of the gearbox, there's the coupling that clamps around the motor shaft. You can see here that it has a aluminum sleeve inside of the coupling, so you want to make sure that that is in there when you go to put your gearbox on your motor, that it hasn't fallen out or gotten lost somewhere. Otherwise your coupling won't fit properly around the motor shaft. So next, I like to start by turning my coupling inside of the gearbox housing so that one of the screws is facing the open port, and both the screws go through the split in the coupling here. So you have one facing one direction and one facing 180 degrees the other direction. So I'll just kind of eyeball the screws inside here through the hole on top and get it relatively close. Now I'm going to push the motor shaft into the gearbox coupling. Sometimes it can be a little bit tight, so just kind of work it on a little bit. And if you need to, stand it up on end, and you can use a mallet to tap on the end of your gearbox. Until it's seated against the face of the motor housing. Next, we're going to lay it back down, and we will put a couple of the screws in that hold the motor and the gearbox together. Now these screws are supplied with the gearbox kit, so if you are assembling a new unit, you should have all the hardware you need. So put your hardware into the 4 holes going around the housing. Okay, now that we have the gearbox and the motor housings together, you want to just take the bolts in finger tight, just so they're snugged up, and you don't need a lot of torque on them right yet. So just finger tight. And now that we got the bolts in, we do this to make sure that the housings are pressed all the way together and seated together properly for when we tighten the coupling. Otherwise, one of the things that can go wrong here is if you tighten the coupling first and you have a small gap between the housing here, and then you go to put the bolts in and tighten them down, it will draw the housings together and your coupling will slip. So we want to make sure we tighten the housings by hand first, just to make sure there's no gap. And now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and stick my Allen wrench down into the gearbox housing to tighten the one side of the gearbox coupling. Now, ideally for this, you probably want to use a T-handle, but if you don't have a T-handle, like I know a lot of you guys don't, you can take a wrench or something like this and put it over your Allen wrench and give you a little bit extra torque. Now, you don't need to really over torque these a whole lot, so be careful that you don't break your wrench or strip out the bolt head. But ideally you would want it more than just hand tight for the coupling. So now what we're going to do is flip the motor over 180 and access the other set screw on the coupling on the bottom side. So we'll go ahead and stick the Allen wrench in there and tighten this side up again. And that's as much as you have to do with the coupling. Then I'll take these black dust caps that came with the installation kit and plug the holes so that no debris or any other kind of liquid gets inside of the gearbox. And these just press and snap in. Another note when assembling the motor and gearbox together, I like to try and line up the labels so that they're on the same side, so that if someone needs to service the unit, they can get all of their information from one angle without having to remove the motor from the machine just to get the information off of it. Now that you've got that together, you'll go ahead and tighten down the housing bolts with a little bit more torque all the way around. Okay, now that you've got the coupling tightened up and the housings tightened together, one of the few things left to do is to put the key that came in the kit with the other hardware onto the gearbox motor shaft. Now you want to make sure you use the key from the kit and not the key that came out of your motor shaft, because they're actually different sizes. So if I hold it up there, you can see that one's actually slightly longer, and that's the one that you don't want to use. So put the key in the motor shaft, try and make sure it's seated all the way, so that when you put your pulley system on the gearbox, you won't have it slipping on you. And a couple other notes. When putting the gearbox together, you want to make sure you don't put any Loctite or anything on your motor shaft in the coupling. Some guys think that that will help keep the shaft from slipping inside of the gearbox, but in reality it doesn't give it a whole lot extra purchase on the shaft, and it will just make it close to impossible to take it apart if you ever need to service it. So don't put anything on the shaft. You just want a dry connection there. It may even have a little bit of oil on the shaft from packaging, so you just want to take a rag and wipe that off and just put it together dry, and that's all you need, and it should hold just fine if you tighten everything down properly.